Hello, and welcome to the Contractpreneurship series, a podcast that delves into the world of contracting and provide insights to commercial and legal professionals on how to unlock value from contracts. Contractpreneurship is a concept I introduced to describe a particular approach and mindset in relation to contracts. It brings together the concept of an entrepreneur, a transformer, reimagining how things are done within the world of contracts. I'm Peggy Pauwels, and today you're listening to episode 5, where we go beyond the contract lifecycle and explore what transformation means in the context of an in-house legal team. Hello, welcome to a new episode of Contractpreneurship. I'm delighted to be joined today by a fellow contractpreneur and a passionate advocate for transformation of the legal service delivery. It's Amy McConnell from Vodafone. Amy, welcome. Amy, you are Global Head of Legal Operations and Business Contracting for Vodafone, and you manage a multidisciplinary team. So not just lawyers, but also project managers, transformation and knowledge specialists, data analysts and IT specialists. So quite an eclectic group of people that you're in charge of. Welcome. Delighted that you're here. Tell us a bit more about what you do at Vodafone.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm really pleased to be here today. So my role at Vodafone has got two broad strands to it. One of those is focusing on our legal operations. So we're looking at how to essentially transform and run the legal department more like a business. So looking at the value we create and the efficiency in driving improvements. And the other side of my role is focusing on contracting, so more of a kind of traditional legal role. And I lead a team who support negotiating contracts with our multinational customers. And that team is based in Singapore, Hong Kong, US, as well as in the UK.
So two sides of a coin, really. So still lawyer and overseeing legal and contracting activity, and then legal operations, which is taking this conversation a bit broader than change around the contract lifecycle, which is very exciting. That sort of, I'm a bit intrigued. How did you get to where you are? Let's step it all the way back, not to your childhood. That's for another podcast. But tell us a bit more how you started your legal career and what took you to your position now.
Sure. So I actually trained in-house. So didn't join in private practice, but trained in-house quite a few years ago, and initially trained in employment and litigation, so quite a different discipline. And then at 1 year's qualified, moved to be the sort of sole commercial lawyer looking after a couple of divisions. So that was really a massive change and one of probably the most challenging role I've taken on in my career, in a sense, mostly because I was so junior and it was a new discipline. So that's really helped me in the rest of my career, thinking if I can do that, then, you know, any change or new area, I will be able to cope with it. So that was the beginnings. And I moved to Vodafone 17 years ago now, again, supporting more commercial. So looking after procurement, negotiating contracts, and then had the opportunity to move and live in Luxembourg for a few years as we set up a procurement company, which was a fantastic opportunity for me. Great to get involved in the setup of things. And already in that role, I'd started to think very much on how do I improve what we do? How do we transform? Because it was very much part of the role, not just the BAU. So loved that. And after a couple of years, I've moved back to the UK and moved from procurement to our enterprise side and looked after the development of our products from a legal perspective. So where can we sell our highly regulated and complex products around the world? And at that point, I suggested to HR that I'd quite like to do a secondment into the business, to have a new challenge, careful what you wish for, because a couple of weeks later, a new opportunity came up to apply to be the sort of chief of staff for the Vodafone business CEO. So quite a big business area and completely outside my comfort zone. I had never done anything like that before, very much a lawyer in the team. But I got the role. It was only on secondment, so that gave me comfort, covering someone's maternity leave, that I could go back to legal. But it was a fantastic opportunity, really, to learn much more about strategy, about finance, about planning, and about operations, and really hearing the strategy of the business and where the business wanted to go. And I spent a lot of that time thinking about what we needed to do in legal to support our strategy in the future. So it felt quite natural when I went back to the legal team to kind of combine that knowledge with my legal skills. And my boss at the time agreed that I would head up a function of legal operations. We had already done some legal operations activity. So we set up a team in Budapest, so an offshore team. We'd started the development of a contract lifecycle management system. So we'd done some work, but it had been sort of either on top of people's day jobs or, a side part of someone's role. And this was really to give more focus to it and to have a member at the leadership team focusing on operations. So moved into operations. And it's been a fantastic journey for me, mostly because I love learning new things and moving into legal operations. It's such a breadth of what you can do, whether that's process, knowledge management, technology, which was a huge learning curve for me, resourcing, looking at the way we work. And so that's what I now focus, that side of my role. And almost a couple of years ago to the day, actually, an opportunity came up to manage our business contracting team. And as I spent a lot of my operations, because we do a lot of contracts in Vodafone, it's a big part of what the team does. It kind of made sense to support that team as well. So I'm a sort of customer of myself in that sense.
Fabulous. And that's why you're a contractpreneur. You think about transformation and improvement, and you think about the importance of contracts. I love it. So would you say that role as a chief of staff, was that really a pivotal moment in your career?
Yes, absolutely. I think before that, as I said, naturally, I had been one of those lawyers that was looking to improve things, and I was always volunteer for the projects and focus on that sort of thing. But it just gave me a completely different perspective, looking at, okay, well, there's this financial planning process, and why aren't we doing that to the same level in legal? Let's focus. I understood the strategy at a lot richer level, so I could bring that into the team. Working with my then boss at the time, who was absolutely fantastic and also a driver of innovation. So that combination worked really well. But yeah, a pivotal moment.
Fantastic. So transformation at the heart of, guess what you do, but also who you are. So let's unpack that a bit, because it's so important, isn't it? To people like you and I, it comes natural, and you always look for a better way of doing things. Yeah. But for others, it can be quite, confrontational. So how, maybe by your experience of coming back into the team, how did your colleagues react to the new Amy and the change that you wanted to apply and the new way of looking at legal and the legal team?
I mean, it varies and I think continues to vary. So there are still plenty of fantastic people in the team that have a similar mindset, actually, that really enjoy the challenge of pushing things forward. So I have lawyers in my team that do the BAE work, but they get a real buzz from helping improve, being part of a project and improve that on top of their day job. And I have other lawyers in the team who are absolutely fabulous at their day job. They love the contract negotiations. That's where they get their energy and buzz. And that's also absolutely fine. So part of, I think, what's necessary about change is catering for everybody. Get those enthusiastic people on the journey with you. That brings the majority of the team along. Of course, there are always people who are a little bit more nervous about change. But on the whole, you're bringing the department forward. And then although even those people who are perhaps a little bit nervous can, see the benefits after a while. They may not be driving it, but they can see the benefits.
What would you say is your biggest challenge, or maybe the challenge in the sense that what did you have to learn yourself to be better at transforming and taking those people with you?
Yeah, over the sort of 5 or 6 years that I've been doing the job, we have tried lots of different ways of bringing the team with you. And that is always challenging. We've just been through another transformation, new strategy and purpose for the team. And I think getting the people's voice in early has been really key, and also the rest of the leadership team. So I have run parts of transformation programs where perhaps I felt as a leader more invested than other members of the leadership team. And so really making sure that the new strategy feels, it is absolutely 100% what the whole leadership want to do, and every member of that team, and then getting people's voice. And certainly from the project's perspective, when you get down to the next layer, that those people who have volunteered and are happy to lead a project, it's, really get to define the output themselves. So that's been, I think, a key learning and different strategies along the way to get that input.
So very much focusing on people's engagement and the people first, and not delving into the what and tasks and actions and all that.
Yeah.
But change is hard, right? It remains hard. And I think the reality still today is that when it comes to change in legal teams, perception, backed by facts, is that it's hard. The change always feels a bit harder when it comes to legal team. You were in the midst of that. I wanted to get your perspective on that. True or not? Is it
It's difficult to say, I suppose, because, I've worked for the same legal team for a long time. So I don't have as much engagement with perhaps the teams that aren't willing to change. I haven't found that there's definitely a shift in mindset starting to think about things differently. And that takes some people very quickly and other people longer. I think that's fine. But I would probably suspect that's the case across the population, not just in legal. And I think maybe looking at our roles in a slightly different way, perhaps something that's been quite helpful is looking at breaking down our roles into the tasks we perform. So some of those tasks can a lot easily be done in a different way, but that doesn't affect the real value that the lawyers are adding. So I found that's the starting process of enabling people to think slightly differently about their roles. Actually, why am I filling in these contracts and names and addresses all the time? So, there's definitely a better way of doing that. So that's in the main. And maybe just been lucky at Vodafone that we've had enough people that are keen to look at things a bit differently, that I haven't felt that resistance as a whole, albeit it takes its time. It's not something that happens overnight. And
you've said the magic word, value. We find working with clients, but equally within our own team, I'll admit it, we're on a journey. We're a multidisciplinary team ourselves here at Deloitte, and understanding where you bring value over and above your own expertise, or looking at your own expertise in a different way to understand and appreciate value in a different way. I find that the hardest conversation, because you hit some resistance and of course what I do is valuable. But as you say, as you start to unpack it to the tasks, you look at things very differently. It's not straightforward though, is it?
No, we could gather all the data of the team and say, well, you shouldn't be doing that because that's not valuable. You shouldn't be doing that. Or why are you spending too much time in these meetings? And actually ask the people themselves, what would help you be either more productive, but actually just make your life easier, and then share examples of that. So you get some team that says, actually, I don't need to be doing these things. Can we put this in another team, or can we automate it, etc., etc., and then sharing those examples. So it's very much getting the individuals themselves to look at what they do and make that decision, rather than sort of saying, oh yeah, well, I don't think you need to be doing that.
But it also shows that you need to invest in understanding what it is they do, and then take them by the hand to show alternatives or a different way of doing things, but be very respectful.
Yeah, because they are the experts in what they do. I mean, I know a lot about contracting, having spent a lot of my career doing that. I know less about what the team do in privacy. I know less a bit about M&A, but I'm not certainly never been an expert. So it is listening to those members and getting the input from them as to what can be changed about their job. I found that to be the more successful route.
Fantastic, and that's great reinforcement about how to go about the change. Contracts, you've said has been a large part of your professional life. So keen to understand how a large part of what you do today, your focus within the legal ops team at Vodafone. So how have you transformed or gone about transforming the contract lifecycle within Vodafone? Tell us a bit about that.
It's a never-ending task. I would suggest it's never done. There's nothing you can tick off a list. But I've approached it very much on a marginal gains strategy, I like to call it. So marginal gains being that you can make lots of small changes, and actually some of those have been quite big. But when you add it all together, it makes a general overall improvement in the process. Because, as you will know, Peggy, in your experience, there are so many factors from getting an instruction that we need to get a contract in place with this customer or this supplier to actually signing the contract. And that's only part of the process, because once it's signed, of course, it's a living and breathing document which changes and should be managed. And as we all know, we could all do better in that part of the process. I sort of almost see it as a kind of coloured dashboard, of which at the beginning everything is probably red. And then over time, you can click the button and turn those bits of those parts of the process green. And I've noticed that some of them, they were green and they've gone back to amber again. So we have to go around and focus on that area and get it back to green again. So that's my overall approach. But there has been some big things we've done that have made a real impact. So, years ago now, but switching from most of our contracts being signed in paper to bringing that, and actually it was probably controlled by the business, but bringing that control of process into legal and going to e-signatures, a game changer instantly. You're cutting 2 weeks off your time to contract, from instruction to signature. So some things have made a big impact. Another example of a big impact when we introduced our contract lifecycle management system, which is a lot of hard work, but we've implemented that. One of the things, working in a team of around about 50 at the time, lawyers that supported lawyers and contract professionals supporting contracts, got their instructions from emails, which found their way to the boss of that team, that eventually triaged their way out to the team member. Automating that process, so establishing a few key criteria, the region, where the customer, the product, routing that to the appropriate team. Again, that just cut days and days out of the process. So there's a few things that make a big impact, and then there's other things that make a smaller impact, but added together, it improves the way you work.
And I love that approach, actually. I will now for forever visualize that dashboard of red going green. But it shows there's lots of things that you need to tackle when it comes to improving the contract life cycle. When we work with clients, it can be quite daunting when we relay that message to them. I think hearing it from you brings it really to life, that it's not one big thing because the task is too enormous, but you have to break it down again. And what about the dreaded process work? Again, particularly in the legal environment, like, no, let's not talk about process. There is no process. Things happen. How have you gone about streamlining your processes?
Yeah, and so before implementing the CLM, step number one is obviously document that end-to-end process, of which the team absolutely did. And that's really important. And then looking at ways you can improve that process again before you putting that process into the CLM tool. So triage was one example of that. But also along the way, let's say we've got certain areas, maybe a particular sales community, we're finding things aren't working as smoothly as we'd like, perhaps the roles and responsibility not clear. So we've zeroed in on that team, looked at the roles and responsibilities, maybe looked at other teams of where it's working well so we can see what's going wrong, and sort of looked at that micro process to try and figure out, okay, I get it now. You were expecting the lawyers to do this. Well, the lawyers were expecting you to do this. That's it, and it's falling between the cracks. So again, it's something, it's never done, but it's something we look at a lot. And actually bringing in people in the team who specialise in process, but also project management, so they can drive projects to completion, has been quite a game changer to the team. And initially directed by me, or let's bring so-and-so in to support on this. And now the lawyers are saying, oh, can I have so-and-so in to help me with this? So that's great.
And that's great because, again, it's about recognising what needs to be done, but then the how. Yeah. And bringing different skills together, which is so important. So you talked about CLM technology, and you've on quite the journey there. Thoughts around that? In a previous podcast, I sort of try to unpack the challenge that is technology, and my overriding message is always technology won't help you or fix your problems. It will enable you once you've got the core building blocks in place. What's your thoughts around technology and CLM technology?
So personally, I feel it's essential to have some form of technology in place. I mean, obviously, we're a really big team, and if you're much smaller, a very tiny in-house team, it's different potentially. But for a big team, I talked about the triage earlier. I mean, it was chaos working it. We couldn't tell you how many matters the team were working on. And it's also very hard to work out if the team are working on the right things, because having got that process in place where we can triage, we can monitor and look at the data and think, well, that type of work, actually, we have a team of paralegals, we can upskill them in that type of work. But before that, we would never have known how many of those that were coming through, and therefore worth training the team on. So you end up with your most experienced lawyers doing a little bit of everything. But putting in technology, I think it's not a silver bullet in the sense of you implement it, which is hard. You do the process, you implement it, that's hard work. And then that just carries on by itself, and off you go into the sunset with your technology there. It doesn't work like that. So you implement it. It does, because we work agile as most companies do now, and it'll do the bare minimum of what you need it to do. And then you need the feedback from the business, from the lawyers, and constantly improve it and then add new features and functionality. And I think one of the things that almost surprised me the most when I came into the role, we'd already started the CLM journey and had launched, made some good progress. I had seen the two members of the team who were part of the legal team that were focused on this. I thought that was it, and perhaps one person in IT supporting. And then when I realised the size of the team, the appropriate size of the team that was supporting from an IT delivery configuration perspective, I was surprised. This was real learning to me. So I think one of the main things that I learned from that is how important it is to have that support team there. So it isn't just for Christmas, is the CLM, it's for life. And you have to look after it. You have to have a product owner in Agile speak that is someone managing the priorities of improving the tool. You have to have, ideally, if you can have trained configurators in-house so they're cheaper rather than having to pay the supplier, and Scrum Masters or delivery managers implementing it. There is a lot to having technology, but it's worth it. And it's a journey, I think, that we inevitably will have to go on now.
Fantastic. And I guess the level of investment and commitment that is required from the organization should not be underestimated, and probably explains why so many tech rollouts go wrong, right? Because everyone wants the shiny tool, roll it out, because these days that journey of rolling out and implementing it does get easier for smaller teams in particular. Yeah. But as you say, it doesn't work by itself, and it needs to be updated to remain relevant as well.
It does, yes. So things change in your business. Yeah. If you don't have the ability to an effective process and system to make those changes, it's quickly out of date and people can't use it. So it's probably my biggest learning is that putting the right support around a tool up front and factoring that in the business case, in the budget, in the resource, in the planning, is key to that success.
Fantastic insight. You mentioned data there. I want to come to that because, again, it's probably something relatively new within the legal team's remit of looking at how they run the function, the teams, and indeed how they project what the team is doing and how they use data in support of that. You must have seen quite the journey and a change on.
Yeah, and I think the key thing about the data to begin with was, a CLM system to the size we wanted to implement for our team isn't cheap. And traditionally our budget was headcount with some travel budget and maybe some training budget. I mean, that's about it. We didn't have an IT budget. So it was quite a challenge to get the business case signed off. And the best we could obviously do is ensure that the system created data that would then drive revenue for the business, because we didn't want the business case to be predicated on, reducing the headcount, because it just would never stack up the numbers. So we had to look at a couple of areas. One, reducing the time to contract, particularly on the sales side, means that you can bring in revenue quicker, and we were able to calculate per day on average how much revenue that's bringing in. So that's one part of it. And the other part is using the data itself that you get from the contracting process. For example, when we sign up with our customers, we'll often have, particularly in the mobile world, minimum spend commitments. But if you don't track that properly, then the customer may not be meeting that threshold. And of course, you're then leaving potentially revenue on the table, or at least an opportunity to discuss with the customer about, are they on the right tariff, etc. So that's key to avoid churn and potentially erosion at the end of a contract. So putting a business case around those things, really, really important. And then using that data, so that's the data that fed that, but also using the data to help us manage the team better as well. So as I spoke to you earlier, seeing the number of requests coming in that might be for trial agreements means we can pass those matters on to our paralegal team rather than having lawyers do it. So that's become important. We can track, obviously, the requests coming in, whether they've gone up and down. So if they're going up, and also the value of those contracts are going up over time, that could present us with a position to be able to say, well, we need additional headcount here to support the growth of the business. So it's so important to have that data. The rest of the company has the data. So if you don't have it, then you're not going to be able to put your case forward for a budget increase.
Yeah, so powerful and so essential.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, if I summarize, embrace technology and embrace the journey and the commitment that it requires, because the return on it is there at multiple levels.
Yeah.
We cannot talk about technology and not touch on Gen AI. I know that you're very interested in the topic. It's obviously, in the papers, in the news, all the trends every day. What's your own thoughts and how are you looking at that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, in general, really excited by it. I think it's, I've used ChatGPT myself. We're doing some work with Microsoft Copilot. Some members of the team have already been on a trial of that already. It's fabulous technology and absolutely will play a part in our future. I think that's clear. Of course, there are many challenges with it. ChatGPT is not for us to use in the workplace with our confidential data for sure, but just gives an indication of the power of the large language models. So it will absolutely form part of our strategy, whether that's working with suppliers on their own strategy or working with our own large language models in-house using our own data. So we will look at all of those options, to be honest. I definitely see huge benefits in the areas of contract analytics, so being able to review huge amounts of data. And with the AI we've already got, so it's not Gen AI, but the AI we've already got in the tools, we can already see that tipping point. What we used to find was some level of the CLM process does involve people manually entering into data. So perhaps at the end of putting the contract into a repository, just updating some of those fields, for example. We don't, in the end, that's not what we want to do. We want the data to be extracted automatically. And we do extract some data automatically. And we're now just seeing the benefits that the extraction is now overtaking the input version. So in the past, it would be the other way around because we needed to train the system up. So that's great news and shows the effect for the future. We know we'll still need to train systems for some time. And then back to data, is a huge challenge in that we obviously have to make sure that any information is based on correct data, and that takes a lot, just a few errors in the system can obviously skew things. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's definitely a huge, exciting field, which will, I'm sure, enhance what we do as contracts in the future.
Fantastic. And it won't remove the value, back to value, it won't remove the value of the legal team and the lawyers.
No, absolutely, because lawyers are key in their analysis and decision-making and advising. That's all really key, important skills. But if the lawyers can have data at hand, rather than sort of just referring to their own experience, which obviously is part of it, but having the data there, then it's a supercharged lawyer in the process.
A superhero so with a cape.
Jackson. I use data on the back. Yeah.
Fantastic. What amazing insights, Amy. Fantastic. So I guess maybe to wrap us up, transformation of legal service delivery, all things contracts and CLM. What would be your guidance for maybe teams that are only just embarking or thinking about this journey of change? What would be your advice to them?
So start small and build. I think that's the key thing, because as you said, Peggy, at the beginning, it can be quite overwhelming. And it's nice now to look back after all those years of hard work to think, gosh, what we've achieved. But obviously each year, each month, it's small changes. Start with collecting data. So we started on an Excel spreadsheet. And yes, we had to get the lawyers to manually fill in. And no, they didn't like it. But it gave us that grounding. So when we moved to contract lifecycle management, we could see the improvements. So start small, start with Excel, start managing manually. Just getting on the journey is the important thing to do.
Yeah. Fantastic. Amy, thank you so much for your insights and sharing so much about what you do at Vodafone. I'm sure our listeners will be grateful and truly take lots of things away for their own journeys. So thank you very much. Thank you, Amy, for your valuable insights. This was another episode of Contractpreneurship. Thank you for listening and watching. If any of this resonates, you want to join into the conversation, do reach out. I'm Peggy Pauwels. I'm a partner at Legal Management Consulting Team at Deloitte. Until next time.